Well, today we're beginning this new series in the book of Ruth. And if you have been around here, especially this year, or if you've been around here, you probably recognize when I take these books of the Bible and I kind of break them up, we go pretty deep, pretty detailed. For instance, I think 1 John is a 5-chapter book, and I think we were there about 13 weeks. So this series is going to be a little different than that. The book of Ruth is 4 chapters, and we're going to take one chapter for the next 4 weeks, or for this week, and then the next 3 weeks that follow. And so really, there's a lot that I could say that I'm not going to say. And so I would encourage you, read the book of Ruth. Read it once a week while we're in this series and see what the Lord is teaching you, because I can assure you I'm not going to touch all of it, as we're just we're taking a step back, doing what I like to call the 10,000-foot view of what's going on. And so for the next 4 weeks, this week and the next 3 weeks that follow, we're going to take one chapter each and really kind of pull out a main theme or a main principle. Now, we don't know for certain who wrote the book of Ruth. There is an ancient Jewish text called the Talmud that says that Samuel wrote it, the prophet Samuel. We don't have solid proof that that's true. We don't have solid proof that that's untrue. That's really the only theory we have. Now, the fact that there is a book of Ruth, the book of Ruth being named after Ruth, is really a little amazing in and of itself. For one, you recognize that in the entire Bible, there are only 2 books that are named after women. This was written in a time whenever women were not respected for what they offered to society. They were not viewed as highly as they ought to be viewed. And that's one of the things that you see Christianity change. It's one of the things you see Christianity start to trend differently. And so it's amazing, even the fact that this book is named after a woman. It's amazing that in the entirety of the Old Testament, the book of Ruth is the only book that is named after a non-Israelite. The Old Testament, that is the text that the Jewish people, the Israelites, hold so sacred, and they should. We hold it sacred as well. But it is their text that they use, that they hold it as in such high esteem. And Ruth was a non-Israelite. And so as you read this, you also notice that Ruth doesn't even necessarily seem to be the main character. As you read through Ruth, there's a lot of it is dialogue. There's a little bit of it that's just story mixed in, but a lot of it is dialogue between really 3 main people. And of the 3, Ruth has the least amount of lines. If this were the school play in the 6th grade, this would be like Ruth would be the one that had like 3 lines when Oliver Twist has over 100. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's that type of situation. So what we do know really about the book of Ruth is that it is a great story of God's sovereignty and of God's goodness. It's a story that everyone should read often. I think it's a story that has shaped so many people's lives. It's about God's goodness and God's sovereignty. And it starts like this, Ruth chapter 1, starting verse 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab, and they remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons." So this book in your Bible, Ruth, it comes right after a book called Judges. And in the historical timeline of Israel, after Moses died, Joshua rose into that place of authority, or that place of leading the Israelites. Well, then after Joshua died, you start to see the Israelites they're doing evil in the sight of God. They're doing what they believe is right in their own eyes. But what you really see, what it boils down to, is they have been disobedient to the Lord. And so the Lord raises up judges. And I think when we hear the word judge, we think of somebody who just hands down a penalty or hands down a judgment. We don't often have a great view of a judge. What do we got going on back here? I see a remote. Yeah, well, all right. Austin's on it. Like, I can't compete with a cooking show or on the home shopping network. So you see that the Lord begins to raise up these judges, and the judges really, it was God appointed these men and women as judges. He appointed them to help protect the people, to help bring them back to where they ought to be, to help bring them back into fellowship with Him. And it was during this time that the book of Ruth, the events took place. And this family of four, they leave their home in Bethlehem during a famine, and they go to this neighboring region that's called Moab. Now, the name Bethlehem means the house of bread. Now, we've talked actually quite a bit in the last few weeks about the significance of names. And it wasn't just people who had significant names, it was places that had significant names. And so Bethlehem means the house of bread. This was a town that was in this area. It was known to have an abundant amount of bread or an abundant amount of barley and wheat, bread-making resources. It was known that if every other area or every other town in the area, if they're having a dry year, well, you can go to Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is going to have what you need. And bread was such a basic, fundamental part of their diets that was at every meal. Sometimes we think of bread, for us, it's like a side. It's like something a little extra special, right? But for them, bread was oftentimes the most nutritious part of their meal. And so during this time, what we see is that this place that usually has high yields of bread-making resources is in a family. This place that is normally known to have a surplus of bread is now, they're beyond the point of rationing out what they have. People are having to flee to other areas. People are having to leave to go to different areas just so that they can survive, just so that they can get what they need. Now, it's hard to come up with a modern-day equivalent in a land where we really are pretty spoiled. Most of us have never experienced this type of like having to leave your homeland to go find something to eat. But the best thing that I could think of was this town that when Bree and I first got married, we lived in a town out I call it the armpit of Oklahoma. It's right where the panhandle begins. And I call it that because of that, but let's be honest, it's kind of gross out there anyways. Loved it out there, loved the people out there, but it's just dry and flat, and it's like there's so many prettier places to live in Oklahoma. But we lived in this place called Woodward, Oklahoma, and that town's economy is totally dependent on the oil field. Now, when Bree and I lived there, they were in an oil boom. It was great. Maya was born out there, and the baby gifts we got out there were expensive. Like stuff that I, as a youth pastor, I'm not buying this for my kid, but these people, I mean, they got change during the oil boom. Well, about a year after we moved away, we went back to go to attend a wedding, and it was a completely different story because they were in the middle of an oil bust. All these coffee shops and businesses and places that we used to go that, like, we're trying to go back and visit, like, we show up and it's boarded up. They're shut down. The RV parks that used to just have fifth wheel upon fifth wheel upon fifth wheel upon Dodge diesel truck that were housing oil field employees, they're just empty. All the oil company businesses that normally they had these empty lots because all of their equipment was out in the field harvesting oil. Well, now all of the equipment is sitting in a parking lot. The business is closed down, and it's just a locked gate. It was a completely different town. It was a completely different vibe. There was less people living there in that time. It was such a kind of an eerie thing. And this was the story of Bethlehem at the beginning of Ruth. This was the story of the house of bread, and this is the story of this Ephrathite family who says, we got to get out of here. We got to go somewhere. Now, the Ephrathite family, they have interesting names also. The father's name is Elimelech, which I could probably throw a stick in here and not hit anybody that knows somebody named Elimelech. That's an interesting name, and it means, my God is king. Man, that's powerful. The mother's name, Naomi, means pleasant or delightful. These names suggest that when they were born, things were going really, really well for this family. Like they had a good life. Pleasant and my God is King. The sons' names, however, indicate that by the time they came around, they probably were already at the beginning of this famine in the house of bread. The name Malon means sick. The name Chilion means tired. So you've got my God is King and delightful or pleasant, and they became parents to sick and tired. Now, we can only surmise exactly what the situation surrounding their births was, but my guess is that as they're in the middle of this famine and these boys are born, these parents are struggling to even feed their children. You've got one child that's just getting sick over and over because he's not getting the nutrition he needs. You've got one child who is fatigued, who is tired because he's not getting the nutrition that he needs. And so this family of four, they do what I think any of us would probably do. They flee and they go to Moab seeking a better life. But let's see what they found there. It says, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So they went to Moab seeking a better life, but what they found in Moab was not a better life, but more heartache. It's true that these boys find their brides, they find the women that they are going to marry to spend the rest of their lives with, but within 10 years of their arrival at Moab, the husband's dead and the 2 boys are dead. So all you see these 3 women who are just widowed, now in a culture where being a mother and a wife was really the only career choice available to them. This was not a good situation. Naomi goes from one heartache to the next heartache, and I cannot imagine the pain that she must have felt. But I think that a painful lesson maybe that Naomi had to learn was that you're not always guaranteed to find a better life if you go seeking for it. Like you go looking for something, you go running from an uncomfortable or painful situation, you're not always guaranteed to find a comfortable and unpainful situation. They left Bethlehem because things were just not going well. But what they found was that troubling situations can be everywhere. They are having fun back there. You know, we're not sure how much time has passed since the boys died, since Mahlon and Chilion died, but at some point Naomi decides it's time to leave Moab behind. It's time to go back to my homeland. Verse 6 says, then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people. He had given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of a husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and bear sons, would you therefore wait until they are grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake, that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. So Naomi is given some information about her homeland. The Lord has visited this place. The Lord has returned to Bethlehem. The famine is over. She can go there, and they have what she needs now. She has people there. She has family there. Maybe she stands a fighting chance if she goes home. It's time for her to leave Moab, to return to Bethlehem, to the house of bread. At the onset, Her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, they set out with her, and Naomi felt like, this is not fair for you to have to go with me just because of my situation. And so she says, you're still young. You're beautiful. You still have a chance here. You will remarry. Go make a life for yourself. Go find a husband for yourself. Go have babies. Make a family. Make a life for yourself. I release you from any obligation that you feel like you have towards caring for me. As I read this earlier in this week, I thought, how would my mom respond in this situation? I'm certain, because I know how much my mom loves Bree, that she would want Bree to do what was best for Bree. She would want Bree to do what was best for certainly our kids. And she would want Bree to do what makes her happy. But at the same time, I think that she'd probably be thinking, you are my son's one true love. My baby boy's love. How can you just move on? And let's be fair, my mom's assessment that Bree hit the jackpot is accurate. It's hard to go up from here, right? She knows what I'm talking about. She's smiling. The truth is I don't think any mother really knows how they would react, but I do know that my mom and a lot of moms that I have met, they form a very special bond with their daughter-in-law. And so it would be really, really difficult, I think, for that mother, especially in this time, in this place, to see that bond broken by distance, to see that daughter just leave and become a part of a different family, to leave your family and become a part of a different family. And we know for certain that Naomi viewed her daughters-in-law with love and endearment, because eventually, when she's addressing them, she's not calling them her daughters-in-law, she's calling them her daughters. She loved them. These are not just women who married her sons. These are women that she cared for, that she endeared, that she loved, that were part of her family. She loved them deeply. She loves them enough that she does not want them to go through what she'll be going through. She knows that she's going to be a widow. She knows that for the rest of her life, she's going to be begging just for sustenance, just for the basic things that she needs. She knows that this is not going to be easy for her, and she doesn't want these daughters of her to go through it. And there was this custom that she talked about. It's called a Levirate marriage, and it was their custom that when a woman became a widow who had no children, that her late husband's brother was obligated to marry her, to take care of her, to provide children for her, to become her husband. Levirate marriages had very little to do with love and affection, and had everything to do with obligation. Now, I cannot speak from a woman's perspective. I can only speak from my perspective. I would not want to be married to somebody who is only married to me out of obligation. And I would think that most women feel the same way about that. The reason that Bree and I work is because we actually like being married to each other. We love each other. We care for one another. If this was just a contractual obligation, our house would not be full of love and joy. It would be a disaster. But Naomi says, I can't even give you that. I can't even provide that for you. I can't even promise that for you. Even if it were still possible for me to do so, you'd still have to wait a really, really long time for this to work out. And initially, both Orpah and Ruth agree, well, we're still going to go with Naomi. We love our mother-in-law. We're still going to go with her, but Naomi continues to urge them, continues to push them to stay behind and to make a life for themselves and to not come with her. And I don't think that Orpah's doing this as or I don't think that Naomi was doing this as to say she didn't want these people with her. I think she genuinely loved her daughters-in-law and she knew what she had coming, and she didn't want them to have to go through it. But it says, then they lifted up their voices and wept again. This is verse 14. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Orpah kissed her, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. return after her. Return after your sister-in-law. They lifted up their voices in this audible, probably public profession of their grief about this entire situation. This would have been the culturally appropriate thing to do. It was the culturally appropriate way of grieving. And Naomi knew that she would not be seeing or hearing from her daughters-in-law anymore. This was not the age of Facebook or FaceTime or even email or the Pony Express. She knew, like, this is it. We're done right here. As soon as we part ways right here and you go back to your people and I go to my people, as soon as that happens, we are done. So this was a real moment of grieving, so they wept. But the girls had different responses to this. Orpah kissed Naomi, which was a way of saying goodbye. And it was after she was saying, I love you, but I understand what you were saying. And thank you for releasing me. But Ruth doubled down, and she instead clung to Naomi to suggest, I'm staying with you, as if she was saying, I love you and I understand what you're saying. Thank you for offering to release me, but I'm staying with you. I'm not going back there. And Naomi urges one final time to Ruth, but Ruth still refuses. Look what she said. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and then that's where I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts from me. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Ruth was determined to stay with Naomi. She was determined that, yes, you've explained to me everything bad that may come from this situation, but I'm going anywhere. I'm going with you anyway. Whatever Naomi went through, Ruth was going to go through. Wherever Naomi lived, Ruth was going to live. Whoever Naomi's people were, they were going to be Ruth's people also. But most importantly, Naomi's God was going to be Ruth's God. During Naomi's final plea with Ruth, she said to her, your sister-in-law has gone to be with her gods. You recognize that was a plural? She was talking about the gods of Moab. The word used there and used in verse 16 is Elohim. And this is just a general term that means God. See, so the Bible, it never acts as if that there are not other things that people call gods, or that they put in the place of God, or that they use as their object of worship. Naomi knew that there was a god that the Moabite people worshipped. The main one was called Shamash. The word Elohim is just referring to an object of worship. And evidently the Moabite people and Orpah and Ruth, they had several different Elohims. But in verse 16, Ruth says to Naomi, your Elohim, singular, your God. See, she already understood that there's only one God that you worship. And my people worshiped many gods, but you only worship one God. Your Elohim will be my Elohim. The object of your worship will be the object of my worship. But then in verse 17, she calls God by name. When it says, may the Lord deal with me, that is the word Yahweh. She's calling God by name there. This isn't the language of somebody who's looking to Shamash as their object of worship. This is someone who was born into a culture who worshiped Shamash, but she's been impacted, radically impacted by the one true God, Yahweh. This is somebody who has had a life-changing altercation with the one true God, and she's sticking with him. Ruth's insistence then isn't just about her mother-in-law. I believe that there's a part of it of wanting to stay with the woman she loves, with the mother that she loves. I believe that she wants to go ultimately where her faith in Yahweh will grow, where it will thrive, where it will flourish. I believe that she's been under the discipleship of her mother-in-law, and she wants to continue that. She wants to stay in that place. She's found a real relationship with Yahweh, not with just some Elohim, but with Yahweh. And she wants to be with the people and in the place that will help that to be cultivated. And I also think that this is all that it took for Naomi. Once she heard Ruth say his name, Yahweh, once she said that, she knew, like, she's determined. She has a real faith in God. She has a real faith in the Lord. She has a determined faith. So she quit saying anything, and they just returned. Chapter 1 finishes like this. It says, so the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? And she said to them, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So when Naomi comes back into town, and she's toting Ruth with her, there's a chatter going on about them. Is this Naomi? Where is Elimelech? Where are the boys at? Who's this Moabite woman that's with her? People are talking, they're stirred, they're chattering, and Naomi responds to the comments, no, I'm not Naomi. I'm not delightful. I'm not pleasant. I have been through the ringer. My husband is dead. My sons are dead. I'm just an old widow now. I came back empty. I came back very different. I left here thinking that I was empty then and I was going to seek something, but now I'm back and I'm telling you I'm more empty now than I was when I left this place. And the storyline of Ruth 1 is it's really a bit of a roller coaster. There's ups and downs. You see the devastation of Naomi's life in the loss of her husband and the loss of her two sons. You see that her sons in the midst of this, like, they get married. That's happy. You see the love of a mother towards her daughters, that she would sacrificially try to spare them from what's coming. You see the commitment of Ruth to both her mother-in-law and to Yahweh. And then as the chapter comes to an end, you see the reality of Ruth's new life. You see the reality of what she's stepping into, Naomi's new life, Ruth's new life. As they come into Bethlehem, it is obvious now that these women are widows and will be living a widow's life. But the thing that I keep coming back to, as I read over this, the theme, I guess, that I kept coming back to was just the decisions. All the decisions that were made that got Ruth and Naomi to the point that they were at, that got them to this place. We read about a famine in the very opening verse, that there was a famine in the land. In the Old Testament, when a famine was mentioned, it was always a result of the disobedience of God's people. It was always coming on the end of they were disobedient. And I said that these events took place during the time of Judges. You should read the book of Judges. It is just a judge will come along, raise the people up, they'll be restored to Yahweh, then that judge will die, or that something will happen to that judge, and then the people, they're just disobedient again. And it's just over and over again. And each time there is a famine. You see this pattern over and over again. God's people honor him, they live with plenty. And then they dishonor him, and they are in famine. It's a cycle that repeats itself over and over again. The people of God, they had a decision to make, and they chose disobedience. And that led to a famine. We see that Elimelech, he made the decision to take his family away from Bethlehem, away from their home. Bethlehem was a small, really somewhat insignificant town. It's why it's amazing that the Savior of the world came from Bethlehem, but it was a place where people honored God. It was a place where people loved the Lord. It's a place where everybody worshiped Yahweh. And so even though they were in famine with people who honored the Lord. And when things got difficult, Elimelech and his family, they had a decision to make. Will we trust God in this moment, or are we going to go and try to do this for ourselves? And listen, I'm just saying, I don't know what I would choose. If my children are starving, if my wife is starving, I may choose the same path that Elimelech chose. but he had a decision to make, and he made it. He chose to go to Moab. Well, the existence of Moab itself, that is the result of a decision. In Genesis chapter 19, Lot and his daughters, they're living out in the hills, and his daughters, they recognize our father's about to die. He won't be able to take care of us. We have no husbands. We have no children, and we live out here in the hills. There are no prospects. So instead of trusting God, they do this horrendous thing. They make this horrendous decision to get their father drunk and to have an incestual relationship with them. And one of them has a son out of incest. And this son's name is Moab. The entire country of Moab, the Moabites, they exist because the daughters of Lot decided to live in fear of their current situation rather than trusting that God would take care of them. The nation exists because they decided to commit a sinful act that was not honoring to the Lord. We know that Mahlon and Chilion, they made a decision to marry Moabite women. And we know that in that culture, nobody got married. No man, no woman, no child. Nobody got married without the help and the blessing of their father. So we know that Elimelech and Naomi, they made a decision to allow this marriage to happen also, to allow it to go through it. And so most of us would say, well, that's no big deal. Interracial marriage is fine, and we would be right in saying that. Interracial marriage is fine, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was that these had very differing gods. They had very differing religious beliefs. That was the big deal. And in fact, the book of Deuteronomy is pretty specific on the fact that the Moabites and the Ammonites, who are another result of Lot's daughter's disobedience, are not God's people. They are not God's people. But Elimelech and his family, they knew that. They knew that they were not supposed to marry Moabites. Honestly, it was even a stretch that they went to Moab. But they made the decision to do so anyways. We read that Naomi, after the death of her husband and the death of her sons, made the decision to return to her home in Bethlehem. Now, perhaps that decision was made easier because they were no longer in famine, because she thought, this is going to be the best place for me to go to be a widow. But a decision was made nonetheless. In verse 14, we read that Ruth made the decision to stay with her mother-in-law. Naomi released Ruth to stay in her land with her people. This was a compelling offer. It would be easier for her. If Ruth stays with her people, she knows everyone. If she goes with Naomi, she knows only Naomi. If Ruth stays with her people, she is respected as a Moabite among Moabites. If she goes with Naomi, she is ostracized because she is a Moabite among Israelites. The known result of her life is incest. If she stays with her people, she has the good prospect of marrying again. If she goes with Naomi, the prospect is not quite as good. If she stays with her people, she'll likely be cared for by a future Moabite husband. If she goes with Naomi, she'll likely have to beg people who don't like her because of her heritage. And even if they give it, she's only getting table scraps. Ruth knows that staying with Naomi is going to be difficult. She knows what this looks like, and yet she makes the decision to stay with her. But more importantly, she makes the decision to stay with Yahweh. In the world at this time, there were a lot of different gods or a lot of different Elohims for people to choose from. Baal was very prominent. He was a well-known Elohim. The Greeks were like, they were just kind of getting things going, and all of their different Elohims, the Elohim of the sun, the Elohim of the stars, the Elohim of water, and all these different Elohims is just getting started with their many different beliefs. In Moab, there were multiple Elohims, but the most prominent one that we've already mentioned was Chemosh. And Orpah eventually said, yes, I'm going to go back to those Elohims. But Ruth said, no, I'm going to stay with Yahweh, the one true God, the one that I've had a real encounter with. And I think that brings up another decision that was made in Ruth's life that I don't think Orpah made, is that Ruth chose to make her faith her own. Like she chose to make this thing real on her own. The most likely scenario is that when these two met Mahlon and Chilion, they were not followers of Yahweh. But they became followers of Yahweh when they married their husband. And I think that at this moment, Ruth owned her faith. She was not just riding the coattails or relying on her husband's faith. This is a side note, but is your faith your own? You need to answer that not out loud, not to me, not for me. You need to answer that for yourself. Is your faith your own, or is it your parents' faith? Is your faith your own, or is it your spouse's faith? Is your faith your own, or is it your youth pastor or your insert spiritual leader's faith? Do you have your own faith, or are you just trying to ride the coattails of somebody else's faith? In my life and ministry, I have seen all sorts of people in church, and some of them take ownership of their faith, and others never. They just ride the coattails of somebody else's faith. Over a decade of youth ministry, hundreds of kids came through our youth group, and we could almost predict which ones were going to stick with it whenever mom and dad weren't making them come to church, and which ones were not. You could see which ones had real faith that they had taken ownership of, and which ones were only there because they were riding the coattails of mom and dad's faith. I can't tell you how many fathers and husbands, sadly, who ride the coattails of their wives' faith but never really take ownership of it for themselves. When I was 10 years old, my mom got sick, and from then on, most Sundays she was too sick to go to church. And do you know what my dad had the nerve to do? He made us go anyways. He would wake up every Sunday morning. He'd go check on my mom. If mom was too sick, or if she was good, we'd all go to church together. But if she was too sick to go, he would get me ready, he'd get my sister ready, he'd get us out the door, and we'd go to church anyways. Is because he wasn't riding the coattails of my mom's faith, which, by the way, my mom has one of the richest amounts of faith I've ever seen. Even on days she doesn't get to go to church, she has such a deep and rich faith. But so did my dad. Men, if this is not your story, that has to change. If the story is, my wife drags me to church, we're not doing it right. The Bible calls us to a different standard, to a higher standard, that we're to be the spiritual leaders in our families. And I think that Ruth chose Yahweh when she's faced with the decision, do I go back to my Elohims, or do I keep going with Yahweh? I think she chose Yahweh because when she was introduced to him by her husband, she chose to cultivate it on her own, not just ride the coattails of her husband's faith and not just depend on his. If you want your faith to thrive and if you want to always choose him, start taking ownership of your faith now. Don't let it depend on another person, because another person, they could die. Another person, anything could happen. Different situations put people in different situations, and so you never know what might happen. So we have to choose to own our faith now. And then if I can just skip ahead to chapter 2, we're not digging into it, but Ruth chapter 2 verse 1 says, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now Boaz is the result of a decision also. Boaz was the son of another prominent Old Testament figure, another prominent person in the Israelite history. In the book of Ruth or Joshua, there's this prostitute who turns her faith to the Lord. She protects the Israelite slaves. She turns her faith to God, Yahweh. We're talking about a prostitute. We're talking about somebody who got paid for sexual relationships. Like, we might put this at the lowest of the low. But she turned her faith to the Lord. She said, I'm no longer living that life. She turns her faith to the Lord, and she has a son named Boaz. And we'll learn about him next week. But there are decisions scattered all throughout history and all throughout chapter 1 that get us to the point that we're at. And there are decisions that each and every one of us have to make. every single day. You wake up and you have to make decisions every day. And let me just say this about decisions. First, we need to recognize that our decisions have consequences. Our decisions produce results. Typically, it follows that our good decisions have good consequences. Our bad decisions have bad consequences. Now, I will say, sometimes we make a good decision that honors the Lord, and the consequence of it doesn't look too good for us in that moment. But if we'll allow the Lord to work, He's always working for us. You are faced with a myriad of decisions in your life. And some of them are really, really big, important. Some of them are not. Just the other day, I was handing out ice cream at Fourth Friday, and this little kid, probably 2 or 3 years old, came over, and we only have 3 options, and we do that on purpose because we don't want people to have decision fatigue. And this little boy came and looked at the sign, and his dad was like, "What do you want?" And he just stared at it. And eventually he backed up, he sat down on the curb, and he did this. And he looked at that sign for a good 30 seconds before he finally got up and chose something. Well, that's an inconsequential decision. Like, if you don't like that bomb pop, especially at the free ice cream truck, throw it in the trash, come back, we'll get you a fudge bar, I don't care. But that's not a huge decision, but some of our decisions are really big. Some of the decisions that we have to make have huge consequences. So I hope that knowing that your decisions are going to produce results, it will cause you to be reflective and thoughtful when you choose. Who you marry matters. How you spend your money matters. How you treat people matters. How all of these things have consequences. The people we spend our time with. So choose wisely, choose with the guiding of the Holy Spirit, and choose the path that most glorifies God. And then secondly, what I want us to recognize is that the Lord can work even in our bad decisions. I mean, do you recognize all the things I just talked about of Ruth chapter 1? Some of those were terrible choices, terrible decisions. Lot's daughter should have never had intimate relationships with their father. But the Lord redeemed the Moabites with Ruth. And I'll give you a spoiler. The climax of this story of Ruth that we'll talk about in a few weeks is the birth of a man named Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. Jesse fathered King David. And Matthew chapter 1, verse 5 through 6 says, "And Solomon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David is the king." Do you know what that is? That's the genealogy of Christ. So the Savior of the world, He came into our place because of a bad decision that was made. So the Lord can honor that. The Apostle Paul wrote it like this in Romans 8:28. "We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good." Even when people mess you up, all things work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. Even poor decisions made can be redeemed by God. Now, this is not me telling you to make whatever decisions you want and just trust that the sovereign God of the universe is going to work it out. That's a terrible way of looking at this. So don't leave here and say, "Oh, the pastor said I can do whatever I want and it'll be all right. God's got it." That's not what I'm saying. What this is encouragement that the poor decisions that maybe you have made and the poor decisions that you will probably make again, the Lord can take those. The Lord can redeem those. You don't have to be defined by those decisions. And so I just want to tell you about 2 more major decisions, and then I'm done. First, know this, that Jesus, the same Jesus who came out of Obed, came out of the line of Ruth, the same Jesus, He decided to go to the cross for you. He decided that instead of using His strength and His power, that He would humble Himself. He would do what the Father was asking Him to do, to take on a death that we don't have to, that we don't want to. He took on the sin that we couldn't handle. And nobody made Him do it. And the Bible says Jesus said that it's His life, that He can lay it down, He can pick it up. He can do that at His own choosing. And out of love, He chose to lay down His life for you. And then secondly, we all have a decision to make. Jesus paid the price, and he calls each and every one of us to take the gift, the simple step to follow me. But we have to choose. We have to make that decision ourselves. I can't make that decision for you. Your parents can't make that decision for you. Your spouse can't make that decision for you. Only you can make that decision for yourself. And I will say this, I think it has to be a daily decision. Not that if I wake up one day and I don't audibly say, I'm choosing you today, that the Lord has renounced me or disowned me. I don't have a theology that says that. But I do know that every single day I have to say, I'm choosing to follow Jesus. I'm choosing obedience to him. Whatever he tells me to do, that's what I'm choosing today. And so maybe you sit here today and you've never followed him before. Maybe you've never made that decision to say, with my life, I'm going to follow him. And I want to say that I invite you to do that today. The band's going to go ahead and make their way forward to just lead us in a couple more worship songs, a couple last worship songs. But there has to be this moment where we say, God, this is the moment that I'm saying, I follow you. Nothing else matters. I surrender my life to you. But then we also have to make the decision as Christ followers to every day say, God, whatever you bring me through today, whatever I have to work through today, I'm going to do it with your glory in mind. I'm going to do it with obedience in mind. And so if the Lord is drawing you to himself today, whether for the first time or for the millionth time, just to say, I'm going to start taking this more seriously, I'd love to pray with you. I'll be right down here during these worship songs. I'll be around here after service. My wife, Bree, will be here also. Our other elders, Ryan, David, you can grab Donovan when you pick your kids up. We'd love to pray with you and just work through whatever the Lord might be doing in your heart. Let's pray together.